hopefully you can, that's big enough that you can read it. But the idea is that we've got this company. And when you're reading these problems, a couple things to be careful about when you're looking for the right information that's going to be relevant and useful. All right. So for instance, you immediately notice that this is a FIFO approach. Remember last week when we talked about FIFO versus weighted average? So boom, you put that in the back of your mind. Oh, this is a FIFO approach. So I'm going to be focused on my cost per unit this month. I'm not going to average in beginning, work, in process. All right, so I know that the difference between FIFO and weighted average. Okay, so this problem, FIFO. All right, I noticed that. Direct materials are added at the beginning of the process. Okay, again, good to know. It's the normal assumption, but they've repeated it for me, so I feel assured. Conversion costs are applied uniformly in production. Okay, again, that would be the normal assumption, unless told otherwise, that if something is 10% done or 20% done or 40% done, that would be the level of effort that has been done so far at any point in time. Whereas with materials, it's either 100% in or 100% out, right? We add it at a point in time. A couple other things to notice. Inspection for spoiled units occurs when the process is 30% complete. Okay, so think of the chairs that we're making, and the chair is only 30% done. When I notice that I do my inspection and I realize rats, for this one chair, the hole was drilled in the wrong place. And I can't fix that, because the hole's already there. I can't move a hole in the chair. So I'm going to have to throw out the whole chair, but at least I don't have to sand it down. I don't have to put on the stain and the varathane. I'm throwing out the chair, unfortunately, but it's an unfinished chair. So I'm wasting all of the materials, but at least I'm saving 70% of the labor and overhead because I found the mistake early enough in the process. That's what I'm thinking in the back of my mind. And in this case, spoilage is 2% of good units. So if 100 units are good, 2 units would be acceptable as bad. All right, and what else do I know? Beginning WIP is only 20% done. So they haven't been inspected yet. I got some costs associated with the value of beginning WIP. I've got some costs associated with this month's production, and I've got a production schedule. So my first question to you is, we've got 2,000 in beginning WIP, 10,000 that we added, so we started. So we got 12,000 units to account for. 8,000 units were transferred out, and there's 3,750 units in ending work in process. How many units were spoiled? So what do you think? Somebody wants to type that into the chat room or turn on your mic. How many units do you think were actually spoiled this month? Nobody want to take a guess? Or has everybody gone home? I'm disappointed. Well, think of it this way. We've got 12,000 to account for. We've got 11,750 that we've already accounted for. So 250, exactly. Thank you. So I know that 250 were spoiled. Now, how do I separate that 250 between normal and abnormal? That's the tougher part. So we know that 2% is considered normal spoilage. So basically 2% of good units. Sorry. So how many units did we test this month and find were good, right? So in other words, I know this 8,000 are good because otherwise I wouldn't have shipped them out, right? So did I test all 8,000 of those this month? What do you think? Yes or no? Just take a guess, type in the chat room and tell me, are they? Yes, exactly. All 8,000 were tested this month. And how do I know that? Well, because the beginning work in process hadn't reached the inspection point yet. It was only 20% done. So all of those had to be tested as well as any of the new ones. So, okay, so I know all 8,000 of them passed inspection. What about this 3,750? Yes or no? Have they passed inspection? What do you think? Of the ending work in process, there's 3,750 units. Yes or no? Did they pass inspection? Or are they still waiting to be inspected? It's got to be one or the other, right? What do you think? Make a guess. So the 40% is throwing you off. Well, at what point is the inspection? Is the inspection at the end of the process? No. Remember, we said the inspection was at the 30% point. So if it's at the 30% point, and these units are all at the 40% point, that means they've gone past the inspection, right? And you're not going to keep going after inspection unless you're good. Because if you're inspected and it looks like, oh, this is a piece of crap, you're going to throw it in the trash now. You're not going to keep working on it. So it means that all of the ending work in process must be good. Yeah, so exactly. It's so they must have been inspected because otherwise they wouldn't have got that far along in the process. I wouldn't have started sanding down something if the holes weren't all in the right place. So it means that these 3,700 are also fully inspected, looking good. So if 2% is acceptable, so of the total that passed inspection, 2% of rejects is considered acceptable. What is that number? Well, 11,750 times 2%. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and I won't be able to see the chat room anymore, so you'll have to turn on your mic but to answer any questions. But I'm going to share my screen so I can show you the question and the solution at the same time, okay? So you should be able to see the question still on the left side, right? So this is all the data that we've got. And on the right would be this physical units flow, which we've already discussed, right? We've got beginning WIP of 2,000. We've got the 10,000 started. What happened to those 12,000 units? Well, we had to finish off the first 2,000. We did 6,000 more, and that brought us up to the 8,000 that we shipped out. And remember, we said there were 250 units that were actually spoiled, of which 235 would be considered normal. And how did we come up with the 235? Well, all 8,000 that we shipped out, they were inspected, obviously, because we wouldn't ship them out without inspection. And all of the 3,750 in the ending work in process, they've been inspected, they passed inspection, because that's why we kept them around. And so that 11,750 would be the amount that we accepted as being good. We multiplied by 2% because that's the normal expected acceptable level of error. And that means 235 units. So given what we did this month, if we had 235 lousy chairs, that would be considered acceptable. Now, you might think that's kind of high and we need to incentivize our production process to get that down. Reasonable thing to think about. But in terms of just accounting for what is happening today, as of today, the normally accepted error rate is 2%. So 235 would be considered acceptable, normal. Unfortunately, we actually had 250 that didn't work or had to be thrown out. So that's why the extra 15 are considered abnormal. They're over and above what I would consider acceptable. Now, hopefully, some months there's 15 over, other months there's 15 under, and maybe by the end of the year, there's no abnormal spoilage at all, on average, perhaps. But in the meantime, it looks like things are not as efficient or effective as we would like them to be this month. And then we've got the ending WIP. So this column tells us the physical units, the physical flow. And so we can envision, hopefully, what's happening and what's in, what's out, what's in the trash, what's still here, what's in finished goods inventory. And so I can see the process flowing through. So step 2 says, okay, let's look at the equivalent units of each of these things. And for FIFO, you remember back here, we said we were employing a FIFO process. So in that sense, we have to use that assumption in calculating our equivalent units and therefore our cost per unit. So FIFO approach says, what work did we do? What were the inputs this month? All right. So I know we had these 2,000 units in beginning work in process that were started last month. Well, what did we have to do this month to finish them off? Well, we didn't have to add any materials. No, because the materials were already there. But remember, they were only 20% done. So because they were 20% done, we had to do 80% of the work this month. So what's 80% of 2,000? 1,600. So what that means is that the 2,000 physical units, I had to do the equivalent of 1,600 units worth of work to finish them off. So in terms of labor and overhead effort to finish them off. I didn't have to add any materials, but I had to do most of the labor and overhead kind of effort to finish them off. then there was the 8,000 that were shipped out. So that means to add up to 8,000, I've got 6,000 start to finish. And then I've got those 250 units that were spoiled. Well, that means I'm going to waste all of those materials, unfortunately. But I'm only going to waste 30% of the conversion. So where does that 70.5 come from? That 70.5 is the 235 physical units times the over here the 30% point, right? So we work on making the chair seats, and we cut out the wood to make it look like a chair seat, and we start drilling holes, right? Boom, boom, boom. And I drilled 4 holes, and then I sent it over to inspection, and they say, "You idiot! One of those holes is in the wrong place. I'm gonna have to throw that out." So that's only 30% of the work that I've done. I've wasted the whole piece of wood. The whole piece of wood's got to be thrown out. But I'm only wasting 30% of my effort. Why? Because even that piece of that chair seat, I don't have to sand it down. I don't have to curve it out to make the nice, instead of it's still flat, right? So you know how you always chisel out something to make it in the shape of your rear end on the chair. So the idea is that I don't have to do that. I don't have to sand it down. I don't have to put on the 4 coats of varnish. So there's 70% of the work I'm not going to bother doing on that chair seat. So yes, I'm throwing it away. It's unfortunate, but at least I'm only wasting 30% of the labor and overhead. I can now focus on the next unit and do that all the way through, because hopefully it will pass inspection. So in this case, we identify the error at the 30% point. There's still a lot of work left to be done to make it into a decent chair, but at least I know now this one will never be a good chair, because I know it will never stand straight because the hole for one of the legs is in the wrong place. So I throw that away. I've wasted 100% of the materials, but I've only wasted 30% of the conversion. And conversion means labor and overhead or effort. And the same thing for the abnormal spoilage. 15 units of the 250 we considered abnormal. Again, with that batch, I'm wasting all of the materials, and I'm wasting 30% of the effort. Ending WIP, 3,750 units. All of the materials are there, but only 40% of the effort, because these ones made it to the inspection point. Yep, all the holes are in the right place. That's great. Let's keep going. So for these 3,750 units, they've all passed inspection, and we've done some of the sanding or whatever needs to be done in terms of the next stage, but still lots more to be done. So so I figured out all of the equivalent units for each of the different types of output, totaled them up. Oops. And and now I can work out my cost per unit. So this is the inputs this month. So this is 10,000 units worth of materials at $109,000. So that's where the $10.90 came from per unit. I've got 9,175 equivalent units of conversion costs, $38,000 worth of conversion costs incurred this month, or 4.1417 per unit. So now I've calculated my cost per unit, and I can use these numbers now to value my cost of goods transferred out and the value of my ending work in process, as well as the value of this abnormal spoilage. So how do I do that? Well, I know beginning WIP was 27,000. We were told that. 20,000 for materials, 7,000 for conversion. What did I have to spend to finish that off? I didn't have to add any materials, but I had to add the equivalent of 1,600 units worth of effort at 4.1417 per unit. So that's the total for the first 2,000 units. Then the next 6,000 units, I valued them. And then what about the normal spoilage? Well, the normal spoilage was 235 units at 1090 each for materials. And remember those normally spoiled units? Only the equivalent of 70.5. Why? Because that was 30%. After that, we stopped working on them. At a little over $4 per unit, or $292. So that's what I wasted on those 235 normally spoiled units. And I incorporate that in with the 8,000 units of good stuff, plus the cost of the 235 units of normally acceptable trash. Gets me 126,730. So I'm going to debit finished goods for 126,730. And I'm going to credit work in process, because these things are all finished. They're not in work in process anymore, right? 8,000 of them have been transferred out, and 235 of them are in the dustbin. Dustbin. I don't think I've ever used that word before. Good word, very popular in England. Don't use it too often around here, but I feel like Mary Poppins. They're in the trash, in the dumpster, whatever you like. But so those 235 units of normal spoilage, they cost me this and this, but we include them in the cost of goods transfer, the good cost of good units transferred out. So I would charge finished goods inventory the value of all of the first 8,000 units, plus I'm charging the inventory the cost of those 235 normally spoiled units. Now, what about the extra 15 units? What do they cost me? Well, I wasted 15 units worth of materials, and I wasted the equivalent of 4.5 units worth of conversion, for a total of $182. And what does that $182? Again, it's no longer a work in process. Those stuff are in the trash bin. So that $182, I would debit abnormal loss and credit the work in process to show that it is out of work in process, but it didn't physically go to the cost, that is, didn't go to finished goods. It's not part of inventory. It's part of this month's loss, as it's an expense associated with inefficiency. And then just to prove to myself what ending work in process would be valued at, I've got the equivalent units of direct materials, valued at $40,875. And then I've got the value of the conversion costs that are still in the work in process. 40% done, right? So that's why the 1,500 equivalent units. What do you think? We good? So at this stage, I will give you a choice. These problems, 16, 17, 18, as well as several other problems, I've posted the solutions on Brightspace. I also went through 17 and 18 in the 11:30 class this morning. So there's a video of that if you want me to do that. So you can watch that video. Or you can help me go through it again. It's another example very similar to this one. The only difference is that it's